April 16, 1945. A muddy field west of Hemmer, Germany. The rain doesn't fall so much as it seeps from a sky the color of dishwater. It mists over the landscape, blurring the edges of the pine forests and turning the rutted farm tracks into canals of cold, brown slurry. For Corporal Frank Miller, a medic with the U.S. 9th Infantry Division, the world has been reduced to this single, draining task, processing the dead end of the Third Reich. The Ruhr pocket has collapsed, and what's left of the German Army Group B is pouring out of the hills, not in a tactical retreat, but in a flood of exhausted, hollowed-out humanity. There are boys who look no older than 15, their ill-fitting uniforms hanging from bony shoulders, and old men of the Volkssturm, their eyes holding the bewildered look of grandfathers who have seen too much. They shuffle past in a line that has no discernible beginning or end, a river of grey ghosts flowing into captivity. The air is thick with the smell of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and the lingering, metallic tang of surrender. Miller stands near a trestle table with a sergeant from the military police, his job to perform a cursory check for injuries on the endless stream of prisoners. He works with a practiced economy of motion, his eyes scanning for the obvious, the blood-soaked bandage, the crude splint, the vacant stare of shell shock. Most he waves through. The severely wounded have already been triaged and sent back. His job is to catch the walking wounded, the ones who might collapse from a hidden infection or a festering piece of shrapnel hours from now. You learn to read the faces. You see defiance, fear, shame, and, most of all, a profound, soul-deep weariness. After a while, the faces begin to merge into one gray, anonymous mask of defeat. But then, he sees her. She is perhaps 20, maybe younger. Unlike the shuffling men around her, she stands straight, her back rigid. She isn't wearing a standard Wehrmacht uniform, but the dark blue jacket and trousers of a Flakhelferin, an anti-aircraft auxiliary. Her blonde hair is matted with mud and rain, plastered to her forehead. But it's her eyes that stop him. They are a startlingly clear blue, and they are fixed on a point somewhere beyond the horizon, refusing to meet the gaze of her captors. There is no pleading in them, no fear. Only a cold, crystalline fury. As she approaches his position, Miller notes the subtle things. A slight tremor in her left hand, which she clenches and unclenches at her side. The way she holds her right arm, pressed tightly against her body as if cradling an injury, though there is no tear in the fabric of her jacket, no stain of blood. When it is her turn, the MP sergeant grunts at her in broken German to raise her arms. The men before her complied sluggishly. She hesitates. For a moment, Miller thinks she will refuse. The air crackles with a silent, invisible tension. The sergeant takes a step forward, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she raises her arms. Miller watches her face. As her right arm lifts, her jaw tightens, and the faintest wisp of a gasp escapes her lips, a sound so small it's almost swallowed by the drizzle. Her eyes squeeze shut for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, the mask of defiance cracks, revealing a glimpse of raw, searing pain. Then it's gone. Her arms are up. Her eyes are open, cold, and distant once more. The MP pats her down clumsily and waves her on. Miller opens his mouth to say something, to stop her, to ask about the flicker of agony he just witnessed. But what can he say? She has no visible wound. She has not complained. He has 1,000 more prisoners to process before dusk. The line is pressing forward. Another gray uniform takes her place, his face a mask of dull resignation. Miller lets her go, watching her walk toward the ever-expanding holding pen, her back still ramrod straight. He tells himself it was nothing. A pulled muscle. The strain of the last few weeks. But as he turns back to the endless river of gray, he cannot shake the image of her face, the sudden, sharp intake of breath, and the deep, hidden pain reflected in her eyes. May 5, 1945. Reinwiesenlager Hemer. The makeshift prisoner of war camp has sprawled across the fields, a city of mud and misery under the open sky. The rain has given way to a weak, hesitant spring sun that does little to dry the earth or warm the prisoners huddled within the barbed wire enclosures. The initial chaos of the mass surrender has settled into a grim, monotonous routine of roll calls, meager rations, and endless waiting. Corporal Miller's medical tent is a canvas oasis of futility, stocked with dwindling supplies of sulfa powder, bandages, and aspirin. He spends his days treating dysentery, trench foot, malnutrition, and the low-grade infections that fester in the crowded, unsanitary conditions. The war in Europe is officially days from ending, but here, the suffering has its own momentum. He has seen the Flakhelferin from a distance several times over the past 3 weeks. She remains apart from the other prisoners, a solitary figure who seems to draw a line of isolation around herself. While others talk in low, furtive groups, she remains silent. While others slump with exhaustion and despair, she maintains that same rigid posture he first noticed. But something has changed. The defiance in her eyes has been eroded, replaced by a feverish, haunted look. Her skin, once healthy, now has a pale, waxy sheen, and dark circles have bloomed beneath her eyes. She is thinner, her cheekbones sharp and pronounced. She is being consumed from within. Other prisoners seem to avoid her. Miller notices they give her a wider berth when lining up for the thin soup that serves as their evening meal. He once saw another woman try to speak to her, only to be met with a cold stare that sent her scurrying away. There are whispers, rumors that pass between the German medics he sometimes works with. They say she is proud, difficult. They say she refuses any help. Miller watches her, a growing sense of unease gnawing at him. He remembers that moment at the intake line, the flash of pain she so carefully concealed. It wasn't just a pulled muscle. It was a seed, planted on that day, and it has been growing in the dark ever since. On this day, he decides he cannot ignore it any longer. He finds her sitting alone near the wire, her back to a post, staring at the distant, tree-lined hills as if she could will herself through the fence and over them. Her right arm is still pressed to her side, but now she holds it with her left hand, a permanent, protective gesture. Miller approaches slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Sprechen Sie English-ish?" he asks, his voice soft. She doesn't turn. Her gaze remains fixed on the horizon. He tries again, this time in the clumsy German he's picked up. "You are hurt. Let me help." For a long moment, there is no response. He thinks she will simply ignore him, that he will have to walk away. Then, without turning her head, she speaks. Her voice is a dry, rasping whisper, rough with disuse. "Nein." Just one word. "No." He stands there, feeling foolish. The other prisoners are watching. He should leave. It's not his problem. She's refused aid. But he stays. He sees the slight, almost imperceptible trembling of her shoulders. He sees the knuckles of her left hand, white from gripping her arm. He kneels in the mud a few feet away from her, breaking protocol, entering her self-imposed space. "My name is Miller," he says quietly in English. "I'm a medic. I saw you, weeks ago. When you came in. I saw your face when you lifted your arm." The silence stretches, thick and heavy. He can hear the distant shouts of guards, the coughs and murmurs of the thousands of men and women trapped in this muddy pen. He is about to give up, to stand and leave her to her pride, when she finally moves. She turns her head, and for the first time, her eyes meet his. The blue is no longer cold, but clouded with a desperate, feverish confusion. The mask is gone completely, replaced by a vulnerability that is shocking. Her lips part, and the words come out in a breath of German, a question that is not for him, but for the universe, for God, for the source of her unending torment. "Warum," she whispers, her voice cracking. Wareham Brent es. He understands the words instantly. Why does it burn? The question hangs in the air between them, a confession of an agony so profound and so constant that it has finally broken through weeks of stoic silence. The medical tent smells of canvas, antiseptic, and damp earth. It is an island of relative privacy in a sea of eyes, but it offers little comfort. The late afternoon sun casts long, distorted shadows across the dirt floor. Corporal Miller has led the German woman, whose name he has learned is Lena, to a small cot in the corner. He had to help her the last few yards, her legs were unsteady, her balance precarious. She sits stiffly on the edge of the cot, her gaze fixed on her own hands, clasped tightly in her lap. The whispered question still echoes in Miller's mind. It wasn't the pain of a clean wound or a simple fracture. It was the pain of fire. I need to see the wound, he says, his German slow and deliberate. Ich muss die Wunde sehen. Lena flinches but gives a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The simple act of consent seems to cost her a monumental effort. He moves behind her. The jacket, he says gently. She works the buttons with her left hand, her movements clumsy and fumbling. He helps her slide the worn, blue jacket off her left shoulder first, then carefully, painstakingly, eases it down her right arm. She lets out another of those sharp, suppressed hisses of pain as the fabric moves, and her whole body goes rigid. Beneath the jacket, she wears a simple, gray cotton shirt. It is stuck to her skin. Not with dried blood, but with a yellowish, weeping fluid that has soaked through a patch on her upper back, just below the shoulder blade. A foul odor hits him, and he instinctively recoils. It is not the smell of gangrene or rotting flesh he has become so accustomed to. This is different. It is acrid, chemical, like spent fireworks or burnt matches. It is a dead, sterile smell. I have to cut the shirt, he tells her. She nods again, her head bowed. He takes a pair of surgical scissors from his medical kit and carefully cuts away the fabric around the affected area. The cloth peels away from her skin with a sick, wet sound. And then he sees it. Miller has seen every kind of battlefield injury imaginable. Bullet wounds, gaping exits from .50 caliber rounds, the shredded flesh from shrapnel, the geometric horror of bayonet thrusts. This is none of those. The wound is not a hole or a slash. It is a crater, roughly 3 inches across. The skin at the edges is puckered and raised, a waxy, grayish-white color, like old candle drippings. The center is a deep, angry pit of mottled red and black tissue. There is very little blood. Instead, the wound is weeping that same foul-smelling fluid, and embedded within the crater are small, grayish-yellow particles, like bits of gravel. He touches the skin near the edge of the wound. It is unnaturally hot, far hotter than a normal fever would account for. What happened? He asks, his voice barely a whisper. What did this? Lena shudders, speaking to the floor in a monotone, her voice hollow. Artillery. In the forest. An explosion in the trees, a bright light. It rained down. Fire. She trails off, her body trembling. An explosion in the trees. Raining fire. The chemical smell. The waxy deposits. The deep, burrowing nature of the burn. A memory surfaces in Miller's mind, a training film he'd watched months ago at Fort Sam Houston, a grainy black and white reel showing the effects of special munitions. They had a nickname for it. Willie Pete. White phosphorus. An incendiary agent designed to burn through steel, to create smoke screens, to incinerate anything it touched. It ignites on contact with air. It cannot be put out with water, in fact, water can sometimes make the reaction worse. It just burns. And burns. And burns, until it has consumed all its fuel. Miller's blood runs cold. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. He understands now why she hid it. It probably looked like a minor burn at first. But the phosphorus particles, embedded deep in her flesh, were still active. Every time they were exposed to oxygen, even the oxygen in her own tissues, they would flare up on a microscopic level, searing her from the inside out. For 3 weeks, she has had a chemical fire, a piece of hell, buried in her body. The question, why does it burn, wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal, agonizing, and horrifyingly accurate description of what was happening to her. He looks from the terrible wound to the back of Lena's head. He is a combat medic, trained to patch bullet holes and set broken bones. He is not a surgeon. And he is facing a weapons effect he has only ever seen in a sanitized training film. He has no idea what to do. The lantern in the medical tent casts a flickering, inadequate light as dusk settles over the camp. The shadows it throws are long and menacing, turning the simple canvas walls into a cavern of looming dread. Corporal Miller has done the only thing he could think of. He has packed the wound with gauze soaked in the last of his sterile water, smothering it, depriving the phosphorus particles of the air they need to burn. It is a temporary, desperate measure, a finger in a dike that is about to burst. Lena lies on the cot, face down, her breathing shallow. The wet compress seems to have eased the immediate, intense burning, but a deep, radiating heat still emanates from the injury. She is shivering, a sign of shock and advancing infection. Miller knows he is out of his depth. This is beyond sulfa powder and clean bandages. She needs a surgeon. She needs a proper operating room, debridement, skin grafts. She needs a hospital. He leaves the tent, his mind racing, and strides across the muddy compound towards the makeshift command post, a captured German barracks building at the edge of the camp. He has to report this. He has to get her moved. He finds Captain Davies, the camp's weary, overworked commanding officer, hunched over a table littered with manifests and requisitions. Davies is a man in his late 40s, an insurance salesman from Ohio who has been aged a decade by the last year of war. He looks up as Miller enters, his eyes bloodshot with fatigue. Miller explains the situation quickly, clinically, trying to keep the horror he feels out of his voice. He describes the wound, the smell, the symptoms. He uses the term white phosphorus. He requests immediate transfer to the field hospital back in Iserlohn. Davies listens, his face a mask of exhaustion. He rubs his eyes with the heel of his hand and lets out a long, slow sigh. "Corporal," he says, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I have 12,000 prisoners in this field. I have a dysentery outbreak in Sector B. I have 3 trucks a day to bring in food and water for all of them. The field hospital is overflowing with our own boys, men who took shrapnel clearing the last pocket of resistance yesterday. I can't spare the transport, and they don't have a bed for one German girl with a funny-looking burn." "Sir, this isn't a funny-looking burn," Miller insists, his voice rising. "This thing is still active inside her. It's eating her alive. She will die. A horrible death." Davies slams his fist on the table, not in anger, but in sheer, frustrated impotence. "Damn it, Miller, who do you think isn't dying a horrible death out there? It's war. She was on the other end of the gun. She got hit. End of story. We do what we can with what we have. And what we have isn't enough for everyone. Our priority is our own men and maintaining basic order in this mess. Now get back to your tent and do what you can for her." "That's an order." Miller stands frozen, the captain's words ringing in his ears. "Do what you can." He walks out of the barracks into the deepening twilight. The air is cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the low hum of thousands of captive lives. He feels a profound sense of helplessness, but beneath it, a slow, hot anger begins to burn. He looks at his sleeve, at the red cross stitched on his armband. What did it stand for if not this? An order was an order. But the oath he took was to preserve life, to combat suffering. It didn't specify which side. Captain Davies wasn't a monster, he was a man making impossible calculations of life and death on a mass scale. But Miller was a medic, and in front of him was one person, one life. The scale was different. The math was different. He stands in the middle of the compound, the mud sucking at his boots, torn between his duty as a soldier and his duty as a medic. And then, another fragment from that training film surfaces in his memory. It was an aside, a mention of a field expedient treatment. Something about how certain chemical compounds could be used to neutralize phosphorus particles, to make them visible for removal. The instructor had mentioned a copper sulfate solution. Copper sulfate. Where in God's name would he find that in a POW camp? He thinks through his inventory, then the wider camp supplies. Nothing. Then it hits him. Water purification. The large Lister bags used for sterilizing drinking water for the GIs sometimes used a copper sulfate compound to control algae. It was a long shot, a desperate, Hail Mary of a chance. His choice is made. He will not obey the spirit of the captain's order. He will obey the letter. He will do what he can. He turns and walks not toward his tent, but toward the supply depot, his steps now filled with a grim, defiant purpose. The only light in the medical tent is from a single, hissing Coleman lantern. It throws Miller's magnified shadow against the canvas walls as he works. He has found what he was looking for, a small, blue-labeled tin of copper sulfate crystals from a water purification kit, pilfered from the quartermaster's stores. He has dissolved a small amount in a basin of sterile water, creating a pale blue, almost luminous solution. His operating table is the same cot Lena lies on. His surgical tools are a pair of forceps and a scalpel he has sterilized over a small alcohol flame until the tips glowed red. This is not medicine, this is battlefield butchery, a desperate gamble against a relentless chemical enemy. He has tried to explain to Lena what he is about to do, using a combination of broken German, hand signals, and the universal language of a medic's calm resolve. He told her it would hurt, that he had nothing to give her for the pain except a stick of wood to bite down on. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear but also a flicker of trust, and nodded. She understood. Any pain was better than the slow, constant fire. Now, she lies face down, her hands clutching the edges of the cot, her knuckles white. Miller takes a deep breath, the acrid chemical smell filling his lungs. He gently removes the wet compress. In the lantern light, the wound looks even more menacing, a pale crater in the landscape of her back. He dips a fresh piece of gauze into the copper sulfate solution and gently dabs the wound. The effect is instantaneous and shocking. Wherever the solution touches one of the embedded phosphorus particles, it turns a dark, inky black. Suddenly, the full extent of the problem is visible. The wound is peppered with dozens of these black specks, some no bigger than a grain of sand, others the size of a small pebble, all of them miniature engines of destruction. He picks up the forceps. "Bereat?" he asks softly. "Ready." A muffled sound, an affirmation, comes from Lena. His hands are steady, but his heart is hammering against his ribs. He touches the forceps to the first blackened particle and pulls. It comes away with a piece of dead tissue. He drops it into a separate basin of water, where it can do no more harm. One down. He works for what feels like an eternity, a grim, meticulous process of swabbing, identifying, and extracting. Each time he removes a particle, Lena's body stiffens, a sharp intake of breath hissing through her teeth, but she makes no other sound. Sweat beads on Miller's forehead, tracing paths through the grime on his face. The lantern hisses. The forceps click against the metal basin. These are the only sounds in the world. He has to be certain he gets every last piece. One missed fragment, one microscopic speck, and the fire will start all over again. He cleans and probes, his eyes straining in the poor light, convinced he has found them all. He irrigates the now raw and bleeding crater with the last of the sterile water. It looks clean. He feels a wave of relief wash over him. And then he sees it. A tiny, almost invisible wisp of white smoke, curling up from the deepest part of the wound bed, near the muscle. He missed one. A fresh jolt of adrenaline surges through him. The particle, re-exposed to the air, has reignited. He swabs the area again with the copper sulfate solution. A single, stubborn black dot appears, nestled deep in the tissue. It's in an awkward position, hard to reach. He has to press down, digging with the tip of the forceps. Lena arches her back, a raw, strangled cry finally escaping her lips. Miller ignores it, focusing with an intensity that shuts out everything else. He grips the particle. It resists, anchored in the flesh. He twists and pulls. It comes free. He drops it in the basin and stares at the wound, his breath held, waiting. No smoke. He waits another 10 seconds. 30. A full minute. Nothing. The fire is out. He cleans the wound one last time, packs it loosely with sulfidusted gauze, and bandages it securely. The burning has stopped. Lena's body, so rigid with tension, finally goes limp, her energy spent. She is shaking with reaction and exhaustion, but her breathing is deeper, more even. He covers her with a blanket. The war in Europe would officially end in 3 days. The camp would be liberated, its prisoners eventually repatriated or transferred. Miller never learned what became of Lena Schmidt. He saw her one last time, from a distance, boarding a truck with other female prisoners a week later. She looked thin and frail, but she was walking on her own. As she climbed into the truck, she turned her head, her eyes scanning the camp, and for a brief moment, her gaze met his. There was no smile, no wave. Just a quiet, solemn nod of acknowledgement across the wire. And then she was gone. Corporal Frank Miller had followed his orders. He had done what he could. And in a small, forgotten tent in the heart of a vanquished empire, he had fought his own private war, not with a rifle, but with a pair of forceps and a desperate hope, against a fire that burned far deeper than the skin.